Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
My Nerd World.
It is My Nerd World, and welcome to it. Depeche Mode, the podcast. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Thank you so much for checking out another episode this week. Remember, if you are listening for the first time, I hope you will subscribe on whatever podcast platform you are listening to. If you happen to be enjoying this on YouTube, like and subscribe there as well. You can leave a comment on YouTube or drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. So it's been a long time coming since I've finally gotten the opportunity to have somebody on the show. I got him up early this morning on short notice because I never know how much time or when I'm going to be able to record the podcast. I am very pleased to welcome, though, from the Depeche Mode Global fan group, and we go way back, as I've talked about on his drinking chat, Rohm. Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. It's great to have you on.
Hey, John, thanks for having me.
I know you've been dealing with a little bit of illness, so it's been a couple of weeks since we've been able to have you on. I hope you're feeling better, though. Seems like it really took a toll on you.
Yeah, I'm feeling good. I still have the cough lingering, so I apologize if I have any coughing going on during the show, but I'm going to try to keep that to a minimum.
So is this residual from the time spent following Depeche on tour, or is this something that happened after the tour was already done and over?
No, I think it's some of my family that they had this cough, and I was hanging out with them at an Angels baseball game, and I think maybe that's where I got it.
For those that don't follow Rob on social media, are you a bigger fan of Depeche Mode, or are you a bigger fan of the Angels? Which one comes first?
Well, I'll say this story. So I used to coach Little League when my son was playing, and one of the kids actually asked me the question because he knew I was a big Angels fan and a Depeche Mode fan, and he said, "If you could only save one of them, like from a fire or something, who would you save, Depeche Mode or the Angels?" And so, of course, I had to pick Depeche Mode. They've never let me down, and of course, the Angels are different, like, every decade anyway. So,
sure,
yeah.
Well played.
I'm a Depeche Mode fan.
Well played. So, for those that I'm sure most of the people listening to the show probably are fans with the Depeche Mode Global fan group, but for those that aren't, can you give us the sort of quick version of Rob Rohm's introduction to Depeche Mode for those that may not be familiar with you, and go ahead and include in there sort of how you came about to go and create the Depeche Mode Global fan group?
Sure. So I became a fan of Depeche Mode back in '85. I was 14 in middle school, and first hearing like People Are People and Master and Servant, and then Shake the Disease came out at that time. Unfortunately, being 14, I didn't really know about concerts, and sadly I missed their biggest show to date, basically, was at Irvine Meadows. So they had sold out the Hollywood Palladium, and they added another show at the 17,000 capacity Irvine Meadows, and they sold that out. So they had played bigger shows in Europe, like on festivals, like with Elton John and things. But as a headliner, I mean, even when you watch The World We Live in live in Hamburg, that venue was only like 6,000 capacity. So 17,000 capacity at Irvine Meadows was massive for them. So I'm bummed that I missed that show, but luckily I did catch them on the next tour, the Black Celebration tour, as a little 15-year-old. So I saw Black Celebration first at the Forum, and then the following night at Irvine Meadows. And of course, since then, I've been to every tour, of course, multiple times every tour. I ended up hosting their Facebook page when they did the fan takeover.
Right.
And I was day 114. And after I hosted the page, I got so inundated with Facebook requests that I decided to start a group. And that's how I came up with the Depeche Mode Global Fan Group. And, it started just as a way to connect with fans across the world and kind of all those requests that I had. And then it turned into something completely different once the pandemic started. Initially, I created what I call drinking chats And it was meant to just kind of hang out with other Depeche Mode fans, like if you're at the bar, but, you know, obviously we're all separated by distance, and just talk about Depeche Mode. Well, it ended up, you know, evolving into this amazing thing where I had guests from all over the world. I had like Brian Griffin, the legendary photographer who did their first 5 albums, as a guest. I had Von George, who's a Depeche Mode YouTuber.
Yeah.
Gareth Jones, who produced, you know, Black Celebration, Some Great Reward, Construction Time Again. Had Peter Keir, who did the videos for Stripped, Shake the Disease, and It's Called a Heart. All these crazy events. Even ended up doing like a 1-year anniversary party for the Drink and Chat, and it was almost like a virtual Lollapalooza. It was just amazing all-day event. Even had like all the fans that were in the Spirits in the Forest movie on, talking to them. That was started the day. Then we had the first time actually Brian Griffin and Peter Keir, who were involved with Depeche in the 80s, but they never met each other. They met each other on my virtual Drink and Chat.
That's awesome.
So lots of cool things happened out of that. And then unfortunately now I've kind of like slipped away from that as real life has come back to play. You know, it's kind of tough to find the time to actually host these events, but I still have the desire, and at some point I plan to. It's just a matter of making it happen. But that's kind of the gist of. And now we're basically about 25,000 members on Facebook, which is the primary area, and there's also Instagram and Twitter at Depeche Global on both of those, and there is a YouTube channel as well. Same thing, at Depeche Global.
So I told the story briefly on the show back when I did the Drink and Chat with you, is that, you know, through our mutual fandom, and I think it actually came about when the Memento Mori era started. I can't remember if you and I were following each other online, but prior to that, I mean, may have been just through the course of the podcast. But it turns out that for those that missed it before, like, Rob and I were running in the same circles in Southern California, going back to Music for the Masses, Violator, and Songs of Faith and Devotion, but we didn't know each other. And so when I connected with Rob, it was just through a series of, I think I know this guy. And then I realized, I'm like, yeah, I do know this guy. I actually went to one of your concerts early on. I don't think we ever nailed down exactly which club it was that I ended up going to that night, but just because of our mutual fandom and going to the same concerts surrounding Depeche and the other bands of that era, I absolutely knew who you were, even though we figured out that I don't think we've ever found any mutual friend connection. It really was just us running in the same circles during that era, both being fans of K-Rock and following the bands around. So it's just, I love that story, Rob. Just the fact that after all these, decades went by, and you and I connected, even though I absolutely knew you back during that time period.
Yeah, it is crazy, and it's funny because I do have several friends that I've just met because we were basically going to the same shows and just would run into them all the time, and yeah, it's great. That's the power of music, right?
Have you had a chance to? It just dropped yesterday, so I don't know if you've had a chance to watch it or if you're aware of it. But Paramount Plus has dropped a documentary on the beginnings of Lollapalooza. Have you seen this yet?
No, I definitely want to see that.
I've watched about half. I believe there's 2 episodes. Perry Farrell hosts it, and it's all about how Lollapalooza started. And so the beginning part of the first episode, I'm right to where they're about ready to begin to document the first Lollapalooza show that started in Phoenix. And I thought the first show was actually at Irvine Meadows, and it wasn't. It actually started in Phoenix when that tour began. But what's funny about it, Rob, is that the beginning part of the documentary chronicles the history of Jane's Addiction, starting with them back in 1988. And it's fascinating because Depeche Mode hasn't been included in the documentary at all. But, you know, those bands those were all in my orbit. They were in your orbit. And seeing like interviews with Jane's Addiction the same year of a concert for the masses at the Rose Bowl and all the other shows that we were going to leading into Lollapalooza. I mean, it's all in that same, it's all during that same time period of Depeche Mode's rise to prominence in that era. And I'm really looking forward to watching the rest of it. And I have to assume you were at the Irvine Meadow first Lollapalooza shows.
I was actually bringing up that Lollapalooza and the first shows with Jane's Addiction. Actually, while I was a senior in high school, which was the Music for the Masses era, I went in December of that year to see Depeche Mode. First, I actually went to Jesus and Mary Chain in San Diego.
Okay.
The next night, I went to Depeche Mode at the Forum, which was almost the identical set to what they played at the Rose Bowl.
I was at that show too.
And then the following night, I went to see Love and Rockets at UCI, and the opening band was Jane's Addiction.
Oh, wow. So
this was in December of '87, actually. Probably one of their earliest shows, I'm guessing. But and I will spill the beans a little. I've heard there is going to be now a tour being announced shortly where Jane's Addiction is actually the headliner, and Love and Rockets is going to be opening for them. So that's supposed to be announced anytime now, I believe. But as far as the Lollapalooza, actually, yeah, I went to the second ever Lollapalooza show. So it was in San Diego. And then I also went to Irvine the next day. But the San Diego show was general admission, which was great because I was a huge Nine Inch Nails fan already.
Right, me too.
And nobody really knew who they were. So I got to go right up to the stage when they were on. And that was technically like their actual first live Lollapalooza performance because in Phoenix, that show you mentioned, their equipment got fried, so they didn't even actually perform there. So, yeah, pretty much from the get-go, getting to see the very first performances from Nine Inch Nails, that was pretty special.
I was working for Music Plus in Orange at the time, and that's where and I was running the all these years later. I'll tell the story. I was running the Ticketmaster sales, and so. We would, when we were running the ticket sales, for those of us that were behind the counter working for the store, when they would release the tickets, we were doing wristbands back then, and they would release the tickets in order of seating. So we'll start with the first row and then right on back, and as you pumped them through. So typically what we do working there is those first set of tickets we set off to the side and keep for ourselves. So I ended up getting the first couple of rows for the Dodger Stadium shows for Depeche, but I remember we got pit seats for Irvine Meadows for Lollapalooza, and I'll never forget it. I mean, it was just incredible. And the same thing. I mean, you think about Nine Inch Nails now, but you're right. I'm reminded that back then, they were certainly gaining in popularity, and certainly among the Depeche Mode crowd they were, but not a lot of people knew who they were. So to be able to see them in that venue, that close in the pit at that show is truly, just truly incredible. And they were, and listen, those Nine Inch Nails has always been this way, but holy cow, they were a force to be reckoned with when they were, out touring for Pretty Hate Machine. It was incredible at the time.
I think they actually sold the most merch actually at the end of the tour. Their shirts were the top seller.
It was just an incredible, it's so funny. I'm watching the documentary and I'm looking at the crowd shots, and we haven't gotten to, I'm hoping they get to Irvine Meadows because I'm just hoping to see myself, but just seeing the t-shirts and going, oh, I had that Lollapalooza shirt, and it took me back again to that entire era that was so dominated for those years with Depeche Mode, and being reminded again too the fact that back then how blessed we were that Depeche was pumping out the frequency of music. I mean, I don't think back then it seemed like an eternity between albums, but it was only like a year and a half. It's incredible to go back and think about just how much music they were creating in such a short period of time compared to what we've been dealing with for the past few decades.
Right. I mean, in the 80s, yeah, like you said, a year and a half at the most between albums. It was just insane. And the output was great. That's what's even more better about it,
Well, and the transition between albums, I mean, the transition in sound for the band in such a relatively short period of time. And I think, it probably has a lot to do with they were younger as well. And, time goes by and moves a lot slower when you're younger. Years, a year back then seems like 4 years, in retrospect. Back then it felt like 4 years, but it was only a year. But to consider the fact that they were pumping out this music and really changing it up as as relatively dramatically as they were. You know, it really is incredible to go back and watch. I'm looking forward to having you see it. I'm really curious to see what you think. It's interesting to see how it came to be, and then being reminded of things like they were inspired by the Reading Festival, and just thinking about the other bands of that era that I followed around that I'm sure you did as well during that time period.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I'm going to have to subscribe to Paramount Plus just so I can see this, actually. But
if we can share passwords, I'll share with you mine. I don't know if they do that.
Oh, there you go.
Plus.
the when you talk about the time frame too, so if you think about the fact, like last night, 6 years ago, was the last time I saw Fletch perform.
Oh, wow.
That was on the Global Spirit Tour. And to think, you know, it basically took them how many years between Spirit to Memento Mori. And if you think of from 81 to 88, when they were playing clubs in Basildon, to all of a sudden playing the Rose Bowl, that's just a remarkable 7-year period. How you got from that to that is just insane, right?
Well, and to that, let me. I'm going to be a little bit unconventional on the podcast this week and kind of jump around since we've got Rob with us. I got an email here, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. It comes from a friend of the show, Chad, and he writes, "I heard that Dave was recently interviewed by Richard Blade on First Wave. This would be on Sirius XM." And David said something to the effect of, Martin is already writing things. I couldn't find the actual audio of that, but I read elsewhere that Martin was seen on tour coming and going from the hotel with his guitar like he was working on something. And Chad goes on to ask, do you think that they're planning a quick turnaround and maybe last album, while they had success with such an epic tour, to keep the momentum up, or perhaps just a few additional songs to add to those 4 leftovers to give a Memento Mori 2.0 double album? Just wondering and dreaming. I do want to get into you following the band around, because I'm really curious to get your perspective. But we know there's those 4 additional fully produced tracks, that one of them being Life 2.0 that Martin had talked about, had mentioned they were supposed to come out last year. I had been told through a couple of different sources that we were supposed to be getting those by this month. I don't think that's happening. The possibility of like a deluxe edition, and then there's the question of the physical release. So let's go back to what he first talked about. I tried to go and find that interview with that Dave did with Richard Blade. I couldn't locate it. I saw a couple of interviews that he'd done with Dave, but they were not concerning what was mentioned here. But I've also heard that people have said that they've heard from the band that Martin was writing on the tour, and that Peter Gordino or Christian had said that there would be more material coming. So do you have anything that, I mean, you spent a ton more time on the road than I did following the band around. I'm curious to get your thoughts and what you may or may not have heard.
I've heard all those things as well, and I do think they are going to come out with another album. I don't think they will ever say it's their last album, nor do I expect it to be their last album, what's coming out, if there is something. I don't think they're that type of band that they want to say, hey, this is our farewell tour. And I mean, all these bands that do that, they tend to do that, and then a couple years later to decide, oh, we're coming back, you know. But I think they're just going to play it by ear, as they have after every tour. You know, it seems like every tour Dave is like, all right, that was the last tour. And then it takes him getting worked back up and getting his energy going. But I do think they might realize, you know, they're getting up there in years. And if they turn something out quickly again, like they did back in the 80s, they could go back out on tour again. And you know, maybe not to the extent of what they just did with the 112 shows on the Memento Mori tour. But, you know, there's also the possibility, and I think this would be a great, although I don't think my pocketbook would appreciate it, but they could do a Sphere residency. That would be amazing, I think.
Yeah, I've heard other people mention that as well. You know, I mean, I'd be really interested to pick their brains now post-tour, because, and I talked about this on a previous episode, it's just it was such a change. You know, obviously with Fletch passing away, the decision to move forward with the album, I'm sure there were a lot of question marks that both Dave and Martin had. But, you know, it's well documented that they sort of almost, you know, I say rediscover, but it's almost as if they discovered a friendship that didn't necessarily exist before. And certainly from the footage that I've seen from the concert that I went to, you can speak to this better than me, but the dynamic of their relationship on stage, I mean, it seemed pretty apparent. And it was much different than what I recall on previous tours, that they had just developed a different relationship than really I had ever seen in even past tours, and going back to the era that we were talking about. I mean, Dave's always sort of been very, I don't want to necessarily say repetitious, but there were moments on World Violation and Songs of Faith and Devotion where you knew when certain aspects of his dance were coming in, or when he'd go and sort of connect visually with Martin. But it seems like it was a lot more genuine and authentic on this tour than it has been on any other tour. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree. I feel like just overall in general, I think they kind of, and it may become part of the, their age and the whole Fletch passing, but I feel like they certainly were embracing and enjoying and soaking in the moments and everything. Even out on tour, I feel like Martin was taking in the sights every different place they visited and doing, like I ran into him at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I was like one of 6 fans there when he actually went and looked at the Depeche Mode display at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
what was that like?
It was, well, other than their one security guard who's just a total, I won't even say it on your show, but other than that guy, it was cool to watch. We didn't get up to talk to Martin because of this one security guy, but like we took pictures with Peter and we got to see him like just smiling and taking in that display, and also like he was checking out the Beatles display, and so it was pretty special to see that, even if we didn't get a chance to really actually talk to him, which I would have loved to. I had just talked to him like not long before then in Washington D.C. I had a photo op with them, and I would have loved to got to chat with him in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but it was just this one security guy that. He's just, yeah.
Well, just being able to be there, knowing that more than likely that was Martin's first time checking it out, I would assume. I mean, just to.
Oh, absolutely, it was for sure.
Yeah, that's just. I mean, that's an incredible story in and of itself. I mean, that's just. I mean, yeah, I would have. I mean, I'm with you. I would have liked to have talked to him as well, and I bet Martin probably wouldn't have cared. But again, who knows? Maybe Martin wanted to be left alone that day. But how much time did you spend talking with him in DC?
Actually, I limited myself because I know their backstage meet and greets are like pretty quick, especially if this was before the show. So I have way too much to say to him, and I mean I've had chats with him before. Like there's even been a time when at a David Bowie concert in 2004 where he bought me a beer and we're sitting in the lobby and just like chatting for like 20-30 minutes. But I had too much to say, so I limited myself because I didn't want to be talking during the photo. I figured this is like a rare opportunity to get a picture with both of them. So my wife and I, we got the photo with them, and I told her, I'm just going to tell them, thank you guys for all the music and for all the memories.
Yeah.
And I limited myself to that because I didn't want to, I had way too many things to say.
I bet. Did he remember you from before? I mean, you've been to a lot of shows, and I want to get into that, but did he remember you?
That's what was funny, because like when we were walking up, he's like, "Oh, hey!" Like like he'd seen a longtime friend or something. So that kind of threw me because I already had that in mind that I was going to be very limited, and so I just said, "Hey, how's it going?" and introduced my wife and tried to minimize and not go back into like, because yeah, I've met him and hung out with him several times over the years, so. It definitely could have went into a long conversation, but I know that that's not the appropriate place for it, especially before the show.
I'm sure you have me beat. I'm positive you have me beat, but I'd be curious, like which bands, and I'll tell you mine really quick, like which bands pop into your mind where when you saw them, they had that reaction because you'd been to so many shows. So for me, definitely Toad the Wet Sprocket. I knew that whenever I showed up, those guys knew who I was. Jesus Jones was another one, and Jellyfish. I remember those guys knew just from following them around. So I'm sure you got me beat. But what what bands would recognize Rohm when when you would show up at the show?
You know, I think it might only be Depeche Mode, actually. I mean,
oh, really?
There's plenty of bands I've seen a lot, but I feel like Depeche Mode, I've definitely far and away, you know, because I've hung out with Martin like several different times, so I feel like they're the one band that truly. I mean, he sees me in. I've been fortunate to be in, like, especially this last tour. I caught 15 shows. Several of them I was in the front row.
Wow.
In New York, he actually threw me a guitar pick and it landed on stage, so I couldn't get it. So he went and grabbed another one. That landed on stage, so I couldn't get it. He actually held up like their bow to go, like, Peter's like, go get him another pick, and he handed him a pick, and so he came over and threw me the third pick, and luckily that one I caught in my hand. And it was funny because even Dave was celebrating, like, raised his arms and fists, and like everyone was like cheering.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's cool because it's all on video too, like, you know, people have recorded it so you could see it on YouTube. But just the fact that he took the effort and even held up the bow to get me a guitar pick was just phenomenal. You know, 3 times it took, but third time was the charm.
It's funny because thankfully, the guy that I went to the show with in Denver, Matt, he and his daughters went. We had front row tickets courtesy of him, and we ended up getting guitar picks. I didn't get one, but his daughters didn't care to have them, so he was kind enough to go and send it to me. So I actually have it sitting here with a little stand-up picture display. I have a guitar pick from the show, so it's one of my prized possessions. You got something. I made you hold off on telling me, but you got something just recently, right?
Yeah, I'm a big collector, and so yeah, this week I was able to purchase something which I consider kind of the holy grail of Depeche Mode memorabilia. I got to buy the Roland JP8 Jupiter 8. That was Alan's, that he used live from 82 to 84 and used for recording Construction Time and Some Great Reward. So it's sitting behind me.
Is that what I'm looking at in the picture right here?
Yeah, the one in the middle. Like,
right.
Yeah, so the one above that was actually Martin Gore's Alpha Juno.
Wow, dude.
And then I also picked up another Martin Gore synth this week as well. So now I have 3 Depeche Mode synthesizers. But that Jupiter 8 is like the holy grail of, I mean, you know, those 12-inch singles that had the live at the Hammersmith.
Yeah, of course.
He's playing that keyboard solely at that show, and you can see the footage in that. Like, there's an actual pro shot video of that show as well. But he's also that's the second keyboard on. It's the one that's on bottom during Live in Hamburg, and he has also used it on the Construction Time tour as well.
So we've got about 8 minutes because I'm cheap and I haven't upgraded to Pro on Zoom and I completely forgot. So let's lightning round some questions here.
Oh man, I had the Pro on mine.
I know I should have gone the other way with it. I'll bring you back on, man. We'll definitely do this again because I could pick your brain. I could pick your brain for hours. So let me lightning around some questions for you. So you did 15 shows on Memento Mori. Was that a target or is it just what you were able and capable to do?
It was not a target. It was just like there were certain key dates. Like I wanted to go see them in Berlin and I wanted to see them in London. So I made those things happen. A lot of times I just bought, like I wasn't planning to go to New York. I was practicing for the West Coast on sale and I just pulled like great tickets for like face value, like the VIP package. And so I let the tickets determine where I was going kind of. I wanted to make sure I had great seats at great prices. I didn't want to overspend. So that's how that happened. And thankfully, the way I worked it out, I got to see all 36 songs that they performed on this tour.
Wow. That's awesome.
So, yeah, it's crazy.
So how many shows have you seen in entirety? How many Depeche Mode concerts have you been to?
So during this tour, the Berlin show was my 50th show. And then
Okay.
London was my 60th, and then I saw them one more time in London. Thankfully, that was when they changed the set list and added Behind the Wheel and Before We Drown and Somebody. So 61, and that's not counting like their solo stuff or even when they did like the Jimmy Kimmel shows and I was at
Sure.
those. I'm just counting their actual concerts that they sold tickets for.
See, no, that makes me happy at my 34. That makes it the fact that you're way ahead of me, but it still makes me pretty proud of my 34. Were you at the? I don't know if we talked about this last time. We might have. Did you go to the Exciter Tour launch show at the Roxy that was put on by
I was
K-Rock?
there.
Okay, so you and I were okay. So again, this is where you and I were both there. I mean, it's a room as big as my office for crying out loud, but that was the closest that I'd ever been up until the show in Denver. Although I would even say I was just physically, I was probably closer at that show than I was in Denver. Just when you put in the barricade and the stage being there, that Roxy show, still to this day, I mean, that was such an incredible experience to see them in such a tiny venue.
I think I was still taller than Dave, even though he was on stage, because that stage was so little at the Roxy.
Yeah. That's so funny. And again, this goes back to, I'm sure this is one of the places where it's like, oh, there's that guy. Real quick, when it comes to, now you've been making music for a long, long time. Did that come out of your love of Depeche Mode? Did that start before your, did you want to become a musician, create your own music because of Depeche Mode? Was it separate, all kind of part of the same thing?
It was all because of Depeche Mode. They inspired me completely, yeah.
And you're still making music today. I mean, I shared you with some of my books, and you shared with me some of your music, of which I really enjoy. You still making music now? I mean, I know you had the recent release, but
yeah, actually, while I was in London to see Depeche Mode, I filmed a music video for my next single. I haven't released it yet. I'm trying to figure out what the best timing is, but the video was actually shot on my iPhone. But it's amazing what these phones can do, like in cinematic mode. So, I'm looking forward to releasing that, and I'm thinking it's either going to come out at the end of June or early July.
If people want to go and check out your stuff, where do you want them to head to?
You can go to robrohm.com.
I think I've been saying
and that's
Rohm.
ROBROHM.com.
If I've been saying it wrong this whole time, I apologize. I think I've been saying Rohm.
No, you know what? It's funny because I was even thinking about that, but it's just like Dave Gahan, right? Everyone's like, is it Dave Gahan or Dave Gahan? Or,
right, Rohm. I got to remember that Rohm.
Nitzareb and Nitzareb, kind of thing like that.
Yeah, well, my real last name is Lojudice, so I changed it to Justice when I got into radio, just because it's so hard to pronounce. So I hope you don't take offense that I've been pronouncing it wrong this whole time.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
Where do you rank in the few minutes that we have left? Where do you rank Memento Mori in terms of the other albums? And I guess do you have a favorite? Where do you put Memento Mori in your ranking?
I haven't really thought about where I put it, but it's definitely a great album. I love the album, but I feel like it's kind of like my favorite is Black Celebration. So I love that it's pretty similar as far as the darkness, in comparison. It might even be like the closest to that type of vibe, I guess you would say. But it's definitely they only have 15 studio albums, so yeah. It's in the top 10 for sure, but I'd have to sit down and actually analyze where it falls.
It always shuffles for me. Like, I don't put a lot of stock in lists, just because a lot of times my moods will shift and change, and so I always have a tough time doing that as well. I agree. I used to kind of put Memento Mori in closer to Songs of Faith and Devotion, but I'm more leaning towards Black Celebration now, having listened to it recently, having not given that a complete listen to from top to bottom in quite a long time. And on that listen, I was like, oh, you know what? There's really a lot of similarities in vibe and uniqueness of some of the tracks by comparison. So I'm with you. I put it more closer to Black Celebration than I do Songs of Faith and Devotion.
I will say, though, it's probably their best album since either Playing the Angel or Ultra. Like, I would probably say Playing the Angel, but...
Well, listen, Rob, I'm about to run out of time because, like I said, I'm a cheapskate. Next time I'll use your Zoom instead of mine. But let's get you back on again. And thanks for coming on such short notice. I know I was afraid that I woke you up. I'm on Central Time, and you're on the Pacific Coast. So I really appreciate you coming on, and it's a great time talking to Depeche, man. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on. It's always great talking.
All right, let's talk soon, and I'll reach out. I'm going to wrap this up without you, so I'll catch up with you later on. But again, I hope you continue to feel better, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks, John.
Again, Rohm from the Global Depeche fan on the podcast. It's a fantastic opportunity to talk to. I'd say one of the biggest fans, but it's so funny. For years, I thought that I was like the biggest fan of Depeche Mode, and clearly there are many individuals, including Rob, who have me absolutely beat in that category. I want to go ahead and share one more piece of listener feedback this week. It comes in from Paul before I wrap up the show. Paul writes, I wanted to say that I really enjoy your podcast, which I stumbled across just a couple of months ago when it appeared on my YouTube feed. So much so that I went back to start and binge listen from the very beginning. How I've missed out on this entertaining podcast for so long. Thank you so much for that, Paul. I appreciate it. My interest in Depeche Mode goes all the way back to New Life from 1981, possibly connected to the fact that I was born and still live in Basildon. And so, at the time, I thought it was cool that a successful band could come together from my small hometown. I've enjoyed their output in the early 80s, although it wasn't anywhere near the massive fan that I am now. Something changed in 1987 when a friend of mine lent me their cassette version of Music for the Masses. I lost my place in time. And that's it. I was hooked. I bought their whole back catalog. And since then, I've bought almost every version of every single and album released. And like you, I'm really disappointed at a lack of physical CD versions of the Memento Mori singles, mixes, and extra tracks, really hoping for some kind of box set soon. I listen to DM every day, and whilst I like other music, it's only Depeche Mode that I own and listen to. There's just something about it that grabs me. I'm impressed with the number of times I've seen them live. You've seen them live. My DM regret is that I've only started seeing them live during the Playing the Angel tour, but I've made up for that by seeing them on every tour since, and twice this time around. I took my 16-year-old daughter to the O2 London gig this year, which she really enjoyed, and I really do hope they continue producing DM music in another tour, but not... But if not, what a wealth of great quality music we already have. Anyway, keep up the great work, and I look forward to the next episode. Thank you, Paul. I really do appreciate that. And like you, I listen to Depeche Mode every single day, and had taken a bit of a break. I say a break from Memento Mori, but really what I mean by that is just listening to individual tracks, not the album as a whole. But have been listening to the album again, and I continue to make this comment, but there's just so little burn on that album, and I hope Rob's right, and that, and also the email that we received from Chad, and that the band, Martin is writing new material, and Dave will still be inspired and have a drive to continue to make music, because this is such an obvious statement to make, but let me say it and then let me qualify it. And that is to say, I'd love to hear new Depeche Mode music. That's a given. However, with this iteration of Depeche Mode, through the tragedy and all the years, I'd love to see what Martin and Dave could continue to produce. And I imagine that if they do make another album, that it would be different. They would want it to be different from Memento Mori. I also imagine they would use this same production team that has served them so well. I'm fascinated by the fact that they kept James Ford on, even though what we've heard of the Spirit production of it being such a tumultuous time making that album. But they clearly like working with him, and with Marta Solongny, it certainly, created a really unique and interesting album, after all of these years. And I don't mean to go relitigate and say all the comments that I've said before about Memento Mori. Just, again, thinking about the future and what Rob said, I really hope that the things that people have heard are true, that Martin was writing material, Dave's going to be interested in making more music, and the way technology is, they don't necessarily have to be in the same space all the time, nor do they have to go out and do another huge tour like they did. So, again, I'm hoping that we get some news soon relating to a live release of the Memento Mori tour. Some people have put together some spectacular concert videos using different camera angles from different shows and syncing it up. It's a little jarring because Dave's outfits are changing and the vibe's a little bit different, but they are really a fun watch in the absence of not having an official release of the tour. So if you go online to YouTube and if you just type in Depeche Mode Memento Mori Tour Multicam, typically that's when those videos will go and pop up. There's nothing on the news front, by the way. I did my typical search for anything new mentioned about Depeche Mode and couldn't find anything, but I was really glad to have Rob on and completely spaced when we started the interview that I don't pay for Zoom, so I only have so much time. But I'll definitely get Rob back on because I could talk Depeche Mode with that guy for hours. Thank you so much for checking out the episode and the Depeche Mode podcast again this week. If this is one of your first times listening, I hope that you'll subscribe on whatever platform that you're listening to the show on. And if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. I also have a Star Wars podcast, and I write science fiction novels. So if you want to support my nerd world and you enjoy reading science fiction, I hope that you'll take the time to treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with my science fiction space opera series. It's called, and it's available on Amazon.com or mynerdworld.net. It's easiest just to go to Amazon.com and search for Jon, Jon Justice. It's a science fiction space opera series. As Earth faces its end, follow pilots Taft, Katha, and their crew on a journey of survival across the galaxy as they fight for humanity's future. The main character in the story is a Depeche Mode fan set in 2172 when music of the 80s through the 2000s is nostalgic and popular among those in the story, all while telling an exciting, action-filled with some romance, epic space opera saga. 7 books in all in the series, available in hardcover, paperback, audiobook, ebook, and Kindle Unlimited. Book 4 in the series, and I don't mention this very often, Book 4 in the series is kind of a connection story that continues the story in books 1 through 3, which is the opening trilogy and tells a complete story, and then books 5, 6, and 7 tell its own trilogy. Book 4 is an offshoot adventure called Corbijn and the Asteroid of Misfortune. So, it's a fun, humorous adventure science fiction story about a former musician turned intergalactic messenger in the wake of catastrophe on Earth. Yes, I named him Corbijn for a reason. So, if you wanted an introduction into the series and a shorter read, you can check out Book 4 in the series and not be spoiled when it comes to the rest of the series, as it's kind of its own standalone while still serving as a connection between the two trilogies. So, if you like science fiction, if you like it epic, filled with some romance, cool technology, spiked with some Depeche Mode references, direct and indirect, head on over to Amazon.com, search for Jon, Jon Justice, and EMBARK. All right, I'm done pushing my book. I'm a bad salesman when it comes to selling my book. But I appreciate those that have checked it out, and I appreciate you checking out the podcast. I'm back again next week. I hope wherever you are happy, you're healthy, and you're safe. God bless, and I'll talk to you then. Bye. Oh, and email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com.
Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening